The U.S. presidential race is now set. Democrats Kamala Harris and Tim Walz versus Republicans Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. And the campaigns are squaring off today with dueling events in key battleground states. Harris and Walz started today in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and end tonight in Detroit, Michigan. The Trump-Vance campaign starts in the Detroit suburbs and ends the day in Eau Claire. Joining us to discuss the latest is Julia Manchester, the Hill national political reporter. Julia, it is amazing just how much this race has changed in the last month. What are you watching for over the next few days?
Yeah, so we know that Harris and Walz are really doing this swing state tour across the country. It'll be the first time a lot of voters are, familiarized with Tim Walz and get to meet him. There's been polling that shows that, 75% of Americans don't actually know much about the Minnesota governor. So this will be an opportunity for him to introduce himself to voters across the country. Now, we know that they will hit Wisconsin and Michigan in the next couple of days. That's going to be a very good opportunity for Tim Walz. We know that he is very comfortable in the Midwest. He's a Midwestern governor. He is very much comfortable talking to blue collar, working class communities in many of these states that play a very pivotal role in deciding elections ahead of November. I'm curious to see how he plays in the Sun Belt, though. We know that Harris has very much closed the gap in states like Arizona, Nevada, or even North Carolina as compared to when Biden was at the top of the ticket. But still, Tim Walz was chosen sort of as this candidate that could potentially deliver that blue wall with Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So that's where he comes into play here. And I think he has a real opportunity here over the next couple of days to introduce himself and make his case.
Now, Donald Trump is reacting to Kamala Harris's pick of Tim Walz for her running mate. He phoned in to Fox News this morning, calling the pick shocking and saying he couldn't be more thrilled. Julia, you also wrote about GOP anxieties over this election being eased by the Walz pick. Is this genuine excitement from Republicans, or is that just political theater?
I don't know if I would say it's genuine excitement, but I think among a lot of Republican operatives and strategists, there is some relief. Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, is someone who is extremely formidable on the national stage and also in a state like Pennsylvania. I covered him in 2022 when he was attorney general and running for governor. And even though he ran against someone who was relatively a weak, very pro-MAGA candidate, he was able to really reach across the aisle and appeal to Republican voters in places in Pennsylvania where Democrats really hadn't gone before, in southwestern Pennsylvania, for example, a lot of the rural communities. And he was able to prove himself as someone who could campaign in a big metropolis like Philadelphia, while at the same time going into some of these smaller, more conservative-leaning communities. He's also someone who has, played a big role, a big bipartisan role, I would say, as governor, really working with Republicans. So there was a fear that Josh Shapiro would be able to peel off a number of these swing voters, or even some maybe moderate to conservative leaning voters. Tim Walz has a much more progressive record. He's the governor of a much more progressive state. Republicans have very much used this opportunity to criticize him over his handling of the 2020 protests over the death of George Floyd for not calling in the National Guard soon enough. So it seems like they find it easier to attack someone like Tim Walz. But I think what you're seeing Donald Trump do here, Drew, is sort of sow division within the Democratic Party. We've seen other Republicans do this as well, as trying to make it, a moderate Josh Shapiro versus wing of the party versus a progressive Tim Walz wing of the party. But I would say that the party is pretty united. We saw Josh Shapiro very much come out and campaign for Harris and Walz last night in Philadelphia. So I don't think Donald Trump has been very successful in that.
Yeah, and also there might be an argument to be made within the Democratic Party that if Shapiro is so popular in Pennsylvania, let him stay there the next few months and advocate for the Harris-Walz ticket.
Yeah, there is no doubt that Shapiro is going to be a very critical surrogate for the campaign in Pennsylvania and really across the country. I mean, watching him at the rally in Philadelphia introducing Harris and Walz was pretty remarkable. He is someone who has political talent. He gets compared a lot to former President Barack Obama. They have a very similar, speaking style. He's very smooth, very comfortable on the campaign trail and in those sorts of positions. So I think they will certainly utilize him as someone who can make the case to a lot of these voters. But, at the end of the day, looking at Josh Shapiro and as someone who has covered him for a few years, he is not going anywhere. I think Tim Walz was in many ways chosen because he is someone who might be ambitious, but, reportedly said in his meeting with Harris, look, I don't have presidential ambitions per se. Josh Shapiro is someone who does have those ambitions and doesn't really hide that. So he's certainly one to watch. We should not be sleeping on him.
A new nationwide poll shows Kamala Harris with a 3-point lead over Donald Trump. The poll conducted by NPR, PBS, and Marist has Harris at 51% to Trump's 48%. Julia, this continues the trend of positive polling for the Harris campaign.
It does. And we have to, obviously say this is a national poll. I think state level polling, particularly in swing states, give us more information about what's happening on the ground. But what this shows is that Kamala Harris is continuing to ride this incredible wave of momentum ever since taking her place at the top of the Democratic ticket. I mean, this is just night and day compared to where this was with Joe Biden. I think a lot of this has to do, not only with Democratic enthusiasm, but potentially with a lot of these swing state voters looking at Harris compared to Trump and maybe seeing, a vision, a presentation that they are more likely to, it's more digestible to them than it was under Biden. She's seen as a better messenger than President Biden was on a lot of his, record and his campaign promises, et cetera. So definitely a positive sign for Harris in that poll. But, I'm curious, as we're going to see more of these swing state polls come out. We have the Democratic National Convention coming up. So I think after that, once we get closer to Labor Day, after Labor Day, we're going to see these polls narrow as they usually do.
Another member of the squad will not be returning to Congress. On Tuesday, Representative Cori Bush, whose district is in St. Louis, Missouri, lost her Democratic primary race to local prosecuting attorney Wesley Bell. Bush has been an outspoken critic of Israel's actions in the war in Gaza and faced an onslaught of attack ads from pro-Israel groups. Julia, this is the second member of the squad, which includes some of the most progressive Democrats, to lose this cycle. What do you think it says about the state of Democratic politics at the moment?
Well, there certainly is this divide on this issue of Israel. We know that Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, other members of the squad, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, they have all been very critical of Israel and the U.S.'s handling of the Israel-Hamas war following the October 7th attacks. So we've seen AIPAC, which is a pro-Israel super PAC, get involved in a number of these primary races, and it's sort of underscores the divide we see within the party on this issue. And, just looking at this from a foreign policy perspective, the situation in the Middle East doesn't appear to be getting better. In fact, it's only getting worse. So I think we could continue to see AIPAC continue to, very much get involved in these races where they see an opportunity. Cori Bush, though, this district in particular, similar to Jamal Bowman's, it's not as safe as a Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. It's a tougher district when it comes to a Democratic primary level. Remember, Cori Bush, knocked out a few years ago another more moderate Democrat from that seat. So it's a very contested district, but it definitely shows the power, obviously, the spending power of AIPAC.
Another interesting primary race is happening in Washington state. Dan Newhouse, a Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump after the January 6th riot at the Capitol, is trying to fend off a Trump-backed challenger and qualify for a runoff later this fall. Julia, 10 House Republicans voted to impeach Trump. Only 2 remain in Congress. Could Newhouse be the latest to fall?
Yeah, Washington state is so interesting politically because it's obviously this blue state, but then you have these more conservative pockets. And we've actually seen there's at least one other member from Washington state who voted to impeach Trump, was a Republican, and she lost her seat in a primary. So, Washington's very interesting because you have these, non-MAGA, non-Trump Republicans running, but they have to walk a very fine line because they want to appeal to maybe some of the more moderate Republicans in their districts, even some Democrats. But also, there is something to be said about the strength of the pro-MAGA, pro-Trump candidates that are running in some of these more red pockets of Washington State. So it's going to be interesting for Newhouse. The trend doesn't really look that great for him. These pro-MAGA candidates have certainly a better record on their side of knocking out a lot of these Republicans who voted to impeach Trump. But it just goes to show once again that this is truly Donald Trump's Republican Party.
You touched on this earlier, but let's delve into it a little bit further. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro spoke during that raucous rally in Philadelphia last night. Shapiro introduced Kamala Harris and her VP pick Tim Walz after being passed up by Harris for the spot. Do you think Shapiro's speech puts to rest any hard feelings over the Veep stakes?
Yeah, I think it does. We know that he did his job last night. He came out there as a governor of a swing state with an extremely high approval rating. I think 61% of Pennsylvania Republicans voters approve of him. That's a very envious approval rating for any statewide politician. He got a rock star welcome, and he also got his chance to be on the national stage as he was introducing these two candidates. Look, at the end of the day, I think Harris's decision, she actually knows Shapiro longer. They both were attorneys general at the same time of their respective states. So they have this, over 20-year long working relationship. But at the same time, I just don't think at the end of the day, this was a great fit. Josh Shapiro strikes a lot of people who have followed him as someone who has main character energy. He's not someone to be number two. I think he looked at this as a stepping stone for even higher office, aka the presidency. Tim Walz, I don't think was necessarily looking at that the same way. And I think Harris probably thought there was much more of a chemistry between her and Walz. Also, Shapiro, look, we talk about that main character energy. There is always the possibility he could, if he's running on a ticket with someone, he's going to upstage them. I mean, a lot of people were talking about that reception he got in Pennsylvania last night. So I don't think it was ultimately anything personal. But like I said before, don't expect Josh Shapiro to go away. He's going to be a very critical surrogate, not only in Pennsylvania, but I could see him campaigning for the ticket across the country.
The thing is, it could be 2 terms up to 32 until he would get a chance to run if Harris does in fact serve 2 terms. So a long time to wait for that main character energy if it goes that way. But let's talk about Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. He says he's bullish on keeping his gavel after Tim Walz was picked for vice president. In fact, Johnson says he thinks Republicans will win both houses of Congress and the White House this fall. Now, I don't think that if Democrats had nominated Josh Shapiro or Mark Kelly, that Johnson would now be saying, "Oh, we're going to lose big in the fall." But so some of this is posturing. But what do you make of what Johnson said, and also the larger fight for control of Congress?
Look, it's interesting that Johnson is saying that because a few weeks ago, before Joe Biden dropped out of the presidential race, we saw Republicans saying the same thing. We're going to win the House, the Senate, and the White House. But privately, a lot of Republican sources tell us that they're pretty, concerned about this idea of Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket. And they were surprised to see how much energy she really has brought to the ticket. I think a lot of people underestimated her as, someone who can lead the presidential ticket. But we have seen her very much galvanize the party. And I think it's telling how confident Democrats are in her, and that so many members in the Senate, but also the House, members in very swing districts quickly went to endorse her. So I think Johnson here is doing a lot of posturing, but at the same time kind of taking advantage of sort of not doing what Donald Trump did in terms of trying to make a divide between Democrats in terms of the Veep stakes, but he's trying to take advantage of, I guess, the anxiety a lot of Republicans had about Josh Shapiro. Now it's Tim Walz. They're going to paint him as a progressive, and he's saying that we're going to paint, any down ballot Democrat as someone who is tied to Tim Walz. So we'll see if that actually works, but certainly, a tougher road ahead for Mike Johnson and keeping the majority.
All right, that's all I got. Julia Manchester, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.